Well, welcome back. We're going to continue talking about multi-channel television services. This is part two of that, which is really part three of our study of television in general. But anyway, we're starting with this right here. This is in the modern era. What's going on? The modern era only makes sense if we look at the past. So let's look at this. Cable started getting popular in the early 1980s. So what was happening was the local franchising entities would regulate how much the cable companies could charge. So in 1980, we were having, there was really some deregulation became popular when Ronald Reagan became president. So by 1984, we actually created a law of Cable Communications Act of 1984, which removed the rights of local franchising authority to regulate rates. Up to this point, they were regulating what they wanted. Now, I should point out, as you see also in 1980, at the bottom of the screen there was a switch in who paid who. Originally, the cable companies were going to pay the providers. They would pay the providers. I'm sorry, the providers would pay the providers would pay the cable company because they wanted their stuff on cable. But in 1980, this switched, and so the cable operator started collecting the fees, which I'll talk about in more detail in just a second. But they had this law in 84 that actually forced the local franchising authority to regulate fees. They remove that. They couldn't do it anymore. Well, what happened then was the cable companies went wild, and they just started gouging people. So by 1992, we had to have another law, which was the Cable Communications Consumer Protection of Competition Act of 1992. They had to stop gouging the customers, and the broadcasters had to carry the local stations. Up until that point, sometimes they didn't. So, for example, in Louisville, we would get our CBS affiliate was from Cincinnati if the cable company did not have a contract with the local CBS affiliate. It was a mess. Well, finally, we had the Telecommunication Act 1996, which is the last act we've had. Okay, and this is 30 years ago now. So it's time for another one. Basically, what happened in 1996 was they took away a lot of the regulations, which was unusual because there was a Democrat in the office, and Democrats usually like regulation, and Republicans usually don't like it. But Bill Clinton was the president, and he was in favor of deregulating. And the idea was they deregulated thinking that it would be better for the consumers because it would create more competition among the cable companies and TV companies. So the TV companies and the cable company, now anybody could do whatever they wanted. Okay, remember when we talked about regulation in the book that talks about this, in the 1950s, AT&T wanted to go in the computer business, but the government wouldn't let them. In 1996, they would let them. AT&T can now become a telephone company as well as a content provider for cable. So they could go in the cable business. Cable companies could also now offer telephone. So that's why you have bundles now where you can have cable TV and your telephone will be bundled together with your internet. Everything will be in one big package. That's because of the 1996 Telecommunication Act. Before that, you couldn't do that. Okay, so where do we go from there? Okay, let's take a minute out to look at how this works. Okay, what I've got on the screen right now is a graph that shows the percentage of cable viewers. In other words, 13% of the cable viewers watch Fox, 9% watch CBS, 8% watch NBC, 8% watch ABC. And then you can see this, and we go on down to different, you can see how much, the percentage is pretty low for most of the, networks. I want you to especially notice ESPN down here, right in here, 2%, only 2% of the cable viewership is watching ESPN. That's an important thing to keep in mind. Now, what I want to point out is this. There is no relationship between how much money the various companies pay or receive from the cable companies, I should say, in the viewership. Here's what I mean by that. Let's take a look at this graph. This is the graph that shows the percentage of the subscription fees, how much the subscription fees these different companies would get. So Fox, even though they have 13% of the viewership, they only get 3% of the subscription fees because of the contracts they have with the cable companies. CBS gets the same percentage, even though they have a lower viewership. So what I'm pointing out is that the viewership is not going to tell you how much money the network is making from their content. Now, keep in mind, they also still have advertising on their networks, and so that's where they're making most of the money anyway. But they're only getting a very small percentage. Look, though, at ESPN. ESPN is getting 18% of the subscription fees, even though they only have 2% of the viewership. So there's no relationship between how many people are watching a show and how much money that particular entity is making from that viewership. Okay? That's an important thing to keep in mind. It's just, it has to do with contracts, how much we're going to pay you percentage-wise, irrespective of what the percentage is. Now, Fox likes the fact that 13% of the people are watching on cable, even if they're not making that much money off of it, because they're still getting revenue from the advertisements that they put on. Okay? All right. Now, DBS, which is the digital broadcast or direct broadcast satellite, they failed at first in the 1980s. They tried to get into the market, didn't work. They didn't have enough channels. They couldn't get to popular shows because the popular shows didn't want to go to TBS. They were afraid that cable companies would get upset with them if they went to TBS. It also performed poorly in bad weather. When the weather was bad, you got bad reception. And they didn't have a digital compression standard, so they couldn't really offer pay-per-view, and they couldn't offer very much premium channels and this kind of thing. So it wasn't very successful enterprise. It was also very expensive. Okay, this is how it works. This is their structure. It's real simple. At some place, there's an earth station that has the content. It uploads it to a satellite. You have a satellite dish on your house or in your front yard or someplace, Okay, so what happens is there's a downlink from the satellite to your dish, and you see the channels. You have a receiver in your house connected to the dish. Very simple technology. You're not going through any kind of business. The satellite's coming straight to your house, which is pretty cool, really. Okay. Well, by the late 1990s, DBS became more successful because their technology improved. Again, this is a case where they didn't have the technology. That was the limiting factor. But by the 2000, they had improved. They had the MPEG-1 video compression had been introduced in 1993. They started using it. Now, that meant they could get 8 channels, digital channels, into what it would take for one analog channel. Much more efficient. We also had the Satellite Home Viewer Improvement Act. And this meant that they could offer local channels to consumers. Before they couldn't. They couldn't offer local channels, so people didn't want to watch DBS because they couldn't watch their local channels. Now they could. And they also were able to provide PPV, pay-per-view. Okay. And they offered staggering start times initially. In other words, they said, we're going to show this movie at 3 o'clock. You can watch it if you want to at 3 o'clock. Um, that was just like hotels did. They did the same thing. They offered staggered times. Now they don't. You can watch them whenever you want to. But anyway, so DBS became a real player, and that's why it's got a percentage of the households today. Okay, so we know that in the multi-channel era, we have 68%, over 2/3 of the people are subscribing. 99% of the people in the United States they have access. Some of them just choose not to. The DBS is the competition. ITV presents modicum of competition, but even the biggest one, which was AT&T's UVerse, they're phasing that out. They want people to go to the direct broadcast satellite. And the important thing is that the fiber optic compression that is now used rather than the coaxial, which I talked about in the last session, that fiber optic compression enables cable companies to transmit 12 signals where it used to be only transmitted one, which means they can provide a lot more content, even though it's not costing them that much more. Okay? They call that multiplexing. This is a huge thing because you get much more content. That's why they can provide more services, more channels, and do more stuff for you. That's a huge advance in the technology over coaxial. This is a graphic. It's way out of date, of course, but I wanted to show you how many channels we're talking about. If you look it up on the internet, you'll see that Spectrum, for example, which is the primary cable provider in Louisville, they have over 250 channels. UVerse, AT&T UVerse, because it's going through the internet, actually has about 500 channels. That's kind of a little bit deceiving because a lot of those are repeat channels. They have an HD version and they have an SD version. So SD means it's standard digital. It's not the highest quality. But anyway, the idea is that we have a lot of channels, a lot more than we could possibly have with broadcast. Okay, that's the idea. However, look at this. This shows how the market, look at satellite TV, look at cable TV. That satellite TV is a dark, and then cable TV is a light blue. And then the internet protocol is the IPTV. That's the sort of green color there. You can notice that just in general, there's fewer people that are subscribing. The subscriptions are going down, 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 down. And that's because more and more people say, the heck with it. We don't want to be subject to what the cable company wants to give us with these stupid bundles. What we're going to do is we're just going to stream what we want. So we'll get Paramount, and we'll get Peacock, and we'll get HBO, and we'll get ESPN. We'll get just what we want and nothing else. Because even though Spectrum has 250 channels, their research shows that their customers only watch about 15 of them. So there's a lot of waste going on there. So people say, we don't need to pay for all this stuff that we're not using. So we can see that this continues to go down. And the prediction is this year it's going down, and next year it's going to go down. And that's why everybody is going to streaming. So the recent activities, we have digital upgrades all over the place. High definition TV. We have more and more interactive services. You can see I've got a list of some of them there. We have tier programming, which is what a lot of people don't like. They prefer a la carte options. So tier programming is when the cable company says, I'm going to give you these 12 channels for this price. And you don't have any choice in the channels. They have their tier 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. A la carte is when you choose what you want. Now, citizen advocacy groups will advocate for a la carte options so that you can choose only get the channels you want and not have to get the fishing channel and maybe the shopping channels that you don't want. But with tier programming, there's a tier. the low tier is the basic, the 8 channels or whatever, 12 channels. And then the next one goes up to 80 channels or 50 channels or whatever. I don't know what the actual numbers are because every cable company does it differently. But there's also a lot of web distribution and that's often the streaming. Not always, but it's often the streaming. A lot of times when you, on your mobile phone, you won't necessarily go to a website. But you can on your computer. If you want to watch Netflix, you can have a Netflix account. You can have an HBO account. And now you can even have an ESPN account. You couldn't used to have ESPN. You had to have a cable. You had to be with a cable company. But they, last year, they started it's about $30 for, to get ESPN, get all the ESPN, and you can, I think it has 2 ESPN channels and you have to pay extra for ESPN2 and ESPNU. But anyway, you can see that for the years, you couldn't do that. Now you can. So you can separate yourself from your cable company and get all the stuff you want. Okay. So these are some of the acronyms that you need to know. PPV, pay-per-view. You need to know VOD, stands for video on demand. Subscription video on demand as SVOD. That's not used very much anymore. NVOD, same thing. Near video on demand. That's the near video on demand is when they would stagger the start of a movie, for example, and say you got to start watching it at 3 o'clock or 8 o'clock or whatever we're going to offer it. They didn't offer it. You couldn't, with pay-per-view. Obviously usually that's an event. Video on demand is when you can watch it whenever you want to. And premium channels like HBO, Showtime, Stars, etc., they will have with your regular with your regular cable company, or you might buy those separately and then watch them whenever you want to. Okay. Video on demand, by the way, I just wanted to say something about that. It's available. It's available anytime. It's a huge moneymaker for the companies. Cable does it. Now DBS does it. DBS didn't used to be able to do it. They expand from movies to other types of programming. Boxing matches, sports. A lot of them doing sports now. And then, of course, premium channels offer it free to subscribers, usually. In other words, if you're an HBO subscriber, okay, you can watch when the shows come on the regular programming, or you can go to your video on demand link on your cable service and watch them whenever you want to. That's a big moneymaker. And that's something that's sort of saving to some of the cable companies. People staying with them because they like the VOD. Okay, now let's talk about this release of home video. Okay, the release time, is the time that a movie is released to the home DVD market, and when the movie makes it to pay-per-view or pay television services. Now, some movies are now released at the theaters at the same time that they are released to DVD and pay television services. So it used to be movies, for example, were always released to the theaters first, and they run through theaters. No, that's no longer the case. Different strategies are used for different kind of marketing plans. Sometimes the movies are released to DVD first. Sometimes they're released to cable first. Sometimes they'll go to the theater first. It just depends on how the marketing company that owns it wants to do it. But the release window is the time that a movie is released to the home market from the time that it is in theaters. That's what they call the release window. But it's changed over the years. Now with streaming, look at Netflix. They do a lot of their own original movies. They don't go to theaters. Not that they can go to theater. They might go to theaters, but they're also going to play it on their channel for their customers, which will get them more customers. It works that way. So they get more customers, they have more money that they can use to make more movies, which will make them more money. So that's why they got in that business. HBO does it. Showtime does it. Stars does it. All of those, they found that all the premium channels are, well, we can make our own movies. We don't have to rely on MGM and the United, etc. Yeah. So the trend tend to be that subscribers to premium channels have dropped over the past few years. The video on demand continues to increase, even though it's not necessarily like it used to be, because now it's a lot more streaming. The idea is that homes that have VOD do watch more television. So that's a statistic that the researchers come up with. But the content is moving across platforms, from cable, from broadcast to streaming, and it's also going from TV to laptops to mobile devices. So that's a platform change. So the consumers look like they're getting a lot more choices, not only of what they can watch, but when they can watch and where they can watch it, etc. Okay, so you can watch TV on many devices. You can watch you have YouTube TV, you have Roku, you have Sling, you have pretty soon Apple is going to be involved in that. They have Apple TV, but it's not like Sling or YouTube TV yet, but it will be. Then we have HBO they had Max Go, which I think now they just call Max. Netflix, those are two big streamers. Sling TV is an interesting kind of TV for Dish because it is a lower price, but it's also on your mobile phone. There's a lot of companies like that, like Roku and Sling, that are providing TV in a non-traditional way, but more and more become traditional because people are using their mobile devices a lot more. And finally, there are more and more apps for DirecTV. I just put on this to show you the big companies in this field. Comcast is always the biggest one. AT&T is still huge. Charter is a very big. Dish is network. Verizon. You can see these are very familiar names to you, showing you how many subscribers they have. This is not 21,000. This is going to be in the thousands. So it's more like 21 million. Okay. Okay. I just threw this in there just for fun. This is the top companies in Latin America, just to show that it's not just a U.S. phenomenon. The biggest one is Sky Mexico. And then there's Claro Brazil, Sky Brazil, Telecom Argentina, etc. As you can see that they have a lot of companies involved in this, not just in U.S., but I thought I'd throw in Latin America just to show that this is not just a U.S. phenomenon. Okay. So where are we going with all this? Okay, well, we're going to look at more broadband distribution, more and more broadband, faster broadband, so people can get more and more services. There's still an uncertainty over retransmission consent and carriage contracts. We have these things called carriage fees. Carriage fees are the fees that have to be paid to the cable company to carry that, your content. There's always a friction between the cable companies and the local channels. The cable companies must carry, but they are capable of having contracts, and the local stations have to have a contract with the cable company, and so they have to go back and forth. We still have times when they don't agree, and a cable company might be broadcasting another CBS affiliate. For example, down in Bowling Green, a couple of years ago, the Fox affiliate couldn't work out an agreement. And so I was down there. I was watching, because I have a home in Glasgow. And so I was watching the Nashville channel because the Bowling Green channel was no longer broadcasting Fox. So I was getting it from Nashville instead. So that still happens. Doesn't happen very often because they have to carry. Okay, there's more and more wireless services, and as telephone companies get more spectrum, because of the HD, we went from analog to digital. Now there's more spectrum for them to rent from the U.S. government. They lease it from the U.S. government. They will then have more services, and that's going to be the things that are going to come. And part of those services will be streaming. There's no limits. And of course, more and more cutting the cord. Cutting the cord means getting rid of a cable coming into your house. Cable TV, or internet. Some internet will move to more and more wireless too, for that matter. But these are some of the things we can look forward to that are going to happen with the with TV, with these multi services in the future. Okay, that brings us to an end for our last session on TV. So we'll stop here, and we'll move on to the next chapter next time.